With the first pick in the 2007 NFL Draft, the Oakland Raiders select quarterback Jamarcus Russell, LSU.
Scouting NFL quarterbacks shouldn't be as hard as former NFL GMs make it look, but the fact is there's so many other dynamics that go into a quarterback's success at the highest level, and playing quarterback in the NFL is the hardest position to play in all of professional sports. Johnny Manziel is the best example of how random variables can impact an NFL prospect for better or for worse, and ultimately determines whether or not a prospect is successful or not. Old Johnny Football should have been one of the pioneers for short, mobile quarterbacks in the big leagues, but nobody can overcome the volume of negative variables he had against him. With the limitations from his stature and the personal demons he faced behind closed doors, Johnny Manziel never stood a chance being drafted into the quarterback graveyard known as the Cleveland Browns. As football fans, we can see certain physical limitations in players while sitting on our couch, sure, but we don't have any influence on where they get drafted, nor do we get to see a psych evaluation for them to identify if they're going to be struggling with the fame and fortune like a Manziel or a Ryan Leaf. Today I'm going to go over the top 10 quarterbacks available in the 2020 NFL Draft. This is going to be a lot harder than the top 10 wide receivers list. I don't even know if this draft truly has 10 NFL quarterbacks because I really had to make a stretch for number 10. Keep in mind, I'm a millennial Madden scout, so I've been a fan of mobile quarterbacks for long before they are widely accepted among NFL coaches. So when I'm looking for a tiebreaker between two prospects, I'll typically side with the guy with the mobility because I believe their potential ceiling is higher because of the added element to their game. Not only does a mobile quarterback offer a higher ceiling, but their floor is higher because you know that you can scheme something for them that doesn't involve them throwing an interception. But first, I want to thank you guys so much for your support on the last top 10 video I did for the wide receivers. That is now the most viewed video on this channel, and so I'm really excited to make another one based around the quarterbacks. The goal for this video is also going to be 2,000 likes. That seems very possible considering the wide receivers one has over 7,000 now. Now, I like to think of these videos as an in-depth player breakdown for the common fan, but I love to hear your feedback on the explanations that I provide, so feel free to share your opinions or suggestions in the comments. Let's dive right into this. Let's get started with Mr. QB1. Joe Burrow is the reason that you can't do a top 10 list before the season even starts. Burrow wasn't even in day 2 consideration coming into the 2019 season, and anyone that tells you otherwise is probably an LSU fan. I remember tuning into the Texas game early in the season, ready to see this reborn Longhorn program, and figured since it was LSU, they were going to be starting another one of these underachieving quarterbacks, and it was a great chance for Texas to make an early statement in the year. But I quickly noticed that this Joe Burrow guy was just different. It seemed like the Longhorns were able to get pressure on him, but he moved around in the pocket so well, and it was never enough to actually make the play. Joe Burrow went on to do this to every single opponent on their gauntlet of a schedule while putting up literal video game numbers. His competitive fire was infectious for his teammates, with other guys like Grant Delpit and Christian Fulton fighting through injuries that may have shut them down for the season if they had a guy like Zach Mettenberger as the starting quarterback. The guys on this LSU Tiger squad knew that Joe Burrow was a different type of cat, and they had a chance to do something really special, and they were right. During this 15-0 national championship run, Joe Burrow displayed an elite level of poise and confidence, like he could do this stuff in his sleep. He showed off a pocket presence that some NFL veterans would be envious of. It's hard to really pinpoint the things that make him an elite quarterback prospect because he doesn't have any individual traits that make him stand out. It's a full package thing that you just know when you see it. Now bear with me as I detour for a minute. I'm going to try and keep this top 10 video focused a little bit more on the positive traits and less on the negatives. I feel like with the wide receivers, I was trying to keep it balanced with pros and cons, and ended up nitpicking with some of the prospects because they're all just so good. But most notably, Joe Burrow's teammate Justin Jefferson. I said he wasn't fast. He turned around and ran a 4.40 at the NFL Combine, making my comment look very ignorant, but I stand by what I said. Jefferson doesn't play with the speed of a typical 4.4 runner, but it's definitely a good thing to see that NFL speed there, and I'll be looking forward to seeing him prove all of us wrong and become a number 1 wide receiver at the next level. But anyways, bringing it back to Joe Burrow, I could try to quickly summarize my thoughts and just say that he doesn't have elite arm strength. But in an attempt to focus on the positives, I think it's more that Burrow just throws a very catchable ball and doesn't overcompensate by trying to fire passes in like a couple of other strong-armed quarterbacks in this class. He had a super talented wide receiving core at LSU, and he would loft the ball where his guys could go and make a play on it. In fact, Burrow was clearly better than anybody in college football last year when it came to tight window throws, and none of the wide receivers on this LSU squad are exclusively burner types, so the arm strength was never fully tested at LSU. If you need some nitpicking or cause for concern with Joe Burrow, Burrow, I'd be worried about him going to the Bengals after being surrounded by some of the best talent in college football to then one of the weakest rosters in the NFL. Personally, I wish that he would pull an Eli Manning or John Elway and tell the Bengals he won't play for them. But he's already 23 years old, and the Bengals could try and call his bluff and force him to sit out the 2020 season, which would then make him re-enter the draft next year with Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields as a rusty 24-year-old. That doesn't fare well for maintaining his status as the #1 overall pick, so unless somebody comes through with a blockbuster trade, poor Joe Burrow is destined for the Bengals. Let's move on to QB2, tank for Tua. That's what everyone was saying going into the 2019 NFL season, including myself. After the Dolphins owner professed his love for Tua and the front office started selling assets for draft capital, it became the unofficial motto in Miami, even though all the players and coaches had something else in mind. All it takes is a couple of fluke injuries for everyone to turn on you and your pro potential, but let's go back down memory lane so you can remember how talented this guy truly is. The college career of Tua Tagovailoa peaked almost immediately when he came in for an ineffective Jalen Hurts in the 2018 National Championship game as a true freshman. Tua displayed some ice in his veins and led the Alabama Crimson Tide to a comeback victory over the Georgia Bulldogs. His mobility and quick release make him almost impossible to defend, but the surgical accuracy is really what sets Tua apart from the field. Much like Joe Burrow, Tua got to play with a super talented trio of wide receivers while surrounded by an all-star cast. But if I could choose a quarterback with a higher ceiling between current Joe Burrow or pre-injury Tua, I'm taking Tua every time. The problem is that you can't go back in time like that unless you're wrapping up the Avengers, so Tua might never be as explosive as he was in that freshman and sophomore season. And on top of that, the history of successful left-handed quarterbacks is not a long list. With the injury concerns, there's a lot of red flags around this guy, and I'm not sure why, but it just kind of feels like Tua's story ends up as a tragedy. I really hope not, because I think the NFL would really benefit from having him succeed. I just hope that he winds up in the right situation. At number 3, we've got Justin Herbert, and this is the quarterback that I am most torn about as an NFL prospect. If you're breaking this guy down as a Madden rookie, he is going to have all the physical tools you could possibly want. He's got the height, he's got a strong arm, one of the strongest, maybe the best in the class, and he's got speed, not just mobility. Dude has some wheels for a lanky white guy. And all reports and signs point to this guy being not just a good, but a great teammate, and he wants to compete. He played in the Rose Bowl this year when he didn't have to, and that's been the trend, to skip those bowl games and get ready for the draft to make sure that you avoid injuries. So he went out there, he competed, he did his thing. He even passed up on being one of the best quarterbacks in the draft last year to come back to Oregon for his senior year when his little brother was going to be on the team as a freshman tight end. So what is it that people are unsure about with Justin Herbert? And I think it's that he's just the anti-hero type. He's not this big rah-rah guy that's going to get in your face or cause a scene on the sidelines like Tom Brady. He's not this guy with a last name that nobody can pronounce consistently. He's humble, he's quiet, he's reserved. And yeah, sure, there's some durability concerns stemming back to his high school junior year where he broke his femur, but it's that anti-hero status of his that has people hesitating a little bit. And before I go on any further, I don't want to make it sound like I'm endorsing that you have to be this macho man football guy to play in the NFL. But when your locker room presence and off the field presence is being compared to Marcus Mariota, it's not a great sign for your ability to lead a team of 52 of these macho man types if you're quiet and chilling in the corner of the locker room. I think that the anti-hero can be successful at the college level playing quarterback, but I'm just not so sure in the NFL. I compared him to Daniel Jones with a little bit of a stronger arm, and as an ACC guy, I actually really liked Daniel Jones coming out of the draft last year. I thought a team was going to get him as a real value pick. However, I did not like Daniel Jones as the 6th overall pick, and it felt like a serious reach. I really like the physical skills that Justin Herbert brings to the table, and I really appreciate a humble athlete these days. I feel like that's a real rare breed, and I'll be rooting for his success. But when you look around the league, all of the top level quarterbacks have a little bit of that dog in them. And personally, when the game is on the line, I want a quarterback that does have that in him, and I just don't think that it's something that you develop over time. While we're on number 3, I want to take a minute to thank the sponsor of this top 10 quarterback breakdown, Manscaped, and their new 3.0 waterproof trimmer. For those that don't know, Manscaped is the only men's brand dedicated to below the waist grooming and hygiene. If you've been social distancing and staying at home, first of all, shout out to you. You are the real MVP, but you've probably noticed how easy it is to let your hygiene go when you don't leave the house. Well, thanks to your sacrifice, we're not going to be trapped at home forever, but before we get released back into the wild, you're going to need to treat yourself to some TLC so that your Big Ben doesn't look like quarantine's Big Ben. I'm a huge fan of Manscaped and their Perfect Package Essentials Kit, which is the first all-in-one manscaping kit that makes manscaping safe and easy. And with their newly released Lawnmower 3.0 waterproof body trimmer, They have really taken this thing to the next level with a ton of new upgrades, like the upgraded 7,000 RPM motor with their trademark quiet stroke technology, which is nice and discreet if you've got other people stuck at home too, adjustable trimmer guards so you can choose your preferred length, and the built-in LED illuminates grooming areas for closer, more precise trimming. As a subscriber, you can get 20% off and 2 free gifts added on if you use my promo code NFL20. That's NFL20, and you will get the shed travel bag and the high-performance anti-chafing Manscaped boxer briefs. Thanks again to Manscaped for sponsoring this video. Let's move on to my QB4. At number 4, I've got Jordan Love, and this is the most polarizing quarterback in this 2020 NFL draft not named Tua. He came into the 2019 season with a lot of hype after a sophomore campaign where he led Utah State to a record 11 wins and set records in passing yards and touchdowns. Those 11 wins helped his coach land a fancy new gig at Texas Tech, and the team as a whole took a step back after his departure. And what happens to things that fall short after being hyped up? They get shredded by the internet. But I am a quarterback optimist, and I believe that Jordan Love has the talent to elevate his game at the next level with better surrounding talent and consistent coaching. And chances are, those people shredding him on the internet, they're not watching Utah State versus the New Mexico Lobos. No, it's more likely that they only saw Jordan Love versus LSU or Boise State, where the rest of his team was severely outmatched. But as for the prospects, Jordan Love throws one of the prettiest balls in this class, has a nice quick release. I'm a big believer in a quick release being one of the more important traits for a quarterback translating into the NFL. Jordan Love has a cannon, not on Patrick Mahomes' level, but good enough, and much like Joe Burrow, he knows when to take some heat off of it at times and finesse a ball where it needs to be. The biggest issue that you'll see from Love was in games against top competition is that he can kind of overcompensate for the lack of talent around him by trying to force some passes into too tight of a window, or at times it just seems like he has a lapse in his better judgment and predetermined where he was going before the snap, and there was nothing the defense could do to change his mind about it. This can result in some head-scratching interceptions that are on a Jameis Winston level bad. I will say that he does seem to bounce back quickly from those mistakes, and it doesn't snowball into a meltdown. Now, some people might just look at Jordan Love and assume that he's a running quarterback, Stephen A, but he is a pocket passer with enough athleticism to move around when necessary. Utah State used him on more read options in the red zone, and he showed the speed and toughness to pound it into the end zone, but he's not a run-first type, and I think that's going to benefit him in his translation to the big leagues. Now, if a coaching staff is smart, they will still use the threat of his ability to run to really open up holes in the running game. And one last note, Jordan Love has a pretty tragic backstory involving his father's suicide, but I'm not good with the mushy stories, so I'll let ESPN or Fox or CBS handle that on a Sunday morning pregame show. They'll probably do a much better job than I could do. But overall, Jordan Love has the highest ceiling of any quarterback in this draft class, but also one of the lowest floors. It's all going to depend on where he ends up. My favorite landing spot for Jordan Love is the Indianapolis Colts because of the coaching in place, the offensive line, having Phillip Rivers in place for a year, and playing in an indoor stadium. Not to mention, the division is wide open for the taking for the next 5 to 6 years. Anybody could win this thing, and it just feels like there's something poetic about Love following up as the future to a guy named Luck. At number 5, I've got Jalen Hurts. Tua Tagovailoa was the guy they told Jalen Hurts not to worry about, but we all saw how that played out. Even though he was relegated to backup duties for his junior year, Jalen Hurts was able to get his redemption moment against Georgia in an SEC championship and basically recreate the same magic that the legend of Tua began with. He also showed great leadership and maturity for handling the situation like a good soldier. So I think the teams that place a high priority on good character guys will probably value Jalen Hurts as much as a round higher than teams that, don't care as much. Bengals, Browns. Jalen ended up transferring to Oklahoma for his senior season to work with the transfer QB king, the college QB whisperer himself, Lincoln Riley. While his production under Lincoln Riley definitely increased, I don't know if Hurts showed enough improvement in the areas needed in a classic NFL passer. His accuracy is still inconsistent and he puts up too many floaters. He also doesn't move on from his first read very well, and that tends to result in him taking off to run with the ball instead of just trusting his pocket. But Jalen Hurts isn't getting drafted to be a classic NFL passer because the abilities that his legs offer is one that you would scheme around, and you need to put him in a position to do what he does well over and over instead of overthinking it and asking him to become something that he's not. I think we're seeing this work out more and more in the NFL, and it's resulting in instant impact from these young rookie quarterbacks. The issue seems to arise more as defenses get more film on this kind of limited offensive game plan and figure out how to identify it pre-snap and adjust accordingly to stop it. Dak Prescott is the perfect NFL comparison for Jalen Hurts, other than, Dak being built like a fullback, and and Jalen Hurts is built more like a thick running back. Dak came in and was surrounded by talent and only needed to just not screw it up, and the plays would be there to be made. The following 2 seasons, defenses adjusted, and he was forced to age up real quick in quarterback years with reading defenses and becoming more consistent with his accuracy. Both Dak and Jalen Hurts have shown to be really careful with the ball and avoid excessive risk-taking, even if it's to their own detriment at times. Turnovers are literally the worst thing that can happen from a quarterback, and I think we're seeing how much so with the lack of interest by teams in free agency regarding Jameis Winston, despite him being a top 5 quarterback in all other statistical categories last year. Jalen just has to hope that he can progress like Dak has over the course of his 4 years in the NFL so far, but the ups and downs are results that can be typical for quarterbacks with passing deficiencies like this. I personally liked Dak Prescott more as a prospect coming out than I do Jalen Hurts because of the extra girth helping him deal with the beating that mobile quarterbacks tend to take, and the surrounding cast that he had in Mississippi State was nothing compared to the loaded rosters that Hurts had played on. The ideal place for Hurts to land in the NFL is on another talented team with a veteran quarterback or a low-tier starter, somewhere that they're able to come in for an injury or an ineffective starter and provide a dynamic jolt of offense, or with a really creative offensive coordinator that can put him in a Taysom Hill kind of role. The Steelers are probably my favorite landing spot for Jalen Hurts to potentially take over for Big Ben in a year, if not sooner. That's it for the top 5, and honestly, those are the only 5 guys in this class that I could see as a starter that I would want for my team moving forward. At number 6, I've got Jacob Eason out of Washington, but for those of you that don't know, he actually got his start in Georgia and started 12 out of 13 games for them as a true freshman, but a knee sprain the following year opened up the door for Jake Fromm. Jacob Eason then transferred to Washington for the 2019 season, started all 13 games for the Huskies last year, threw for over 3,000 yards, 23 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 8-5 record. All seems pretty solid, right? And there's going to be some boomers out there that still want their quarterbacks to be tall and statuesque in the pocket, but I'm not a huge analytics guy, but I know that the NFL is moving towards a direction where you need a mobile quarterback or your offense is going to be held back. The statues have become too easy to defend, and I personally would not be investing a lot of draft capital into a guy that I did not think fit the new prototype moving forward. But teams like the Buccaneers, Patriots, and Falcons all have those classic pocket passing types at quarterback and could see some value in drafting a guy like Jacob Eason as a developmental guy for the future. And this isn't a shot at Jacob Eason, he's actually a really talented quarterback, and if he lands behind a decent offensive line, he's definitely got a chance for some success. But I think that he is your classic sort of Mega Man overthrower that has got a cannon that when you see it, it's fun to watch. It's enjoyable to see the ball come out of his hand. But he's one of those dudes that just sort of doesn't know how to tone it down. He's always giving you his fastball, which makes his passes a little bit uncatchable. So now I not only need a solid offensive line in front of him to protect my statue, but I need really good pass catchers around him with solid hands that can handle that fastball coming at him every single time. At number 7, I've got Washington State's Anthony Gordon. We only got to see 1 year of Anthony Gordon playing in Mike Leake's air raid system as he sat behind Gardner Minshew, but man, did this guy see some production in his 1 year. He was the 16th player in FBS history to pass for 5,000 yards in one season. He had 9 touchdowns, 570 yards in one game against UCLA. When I went back and watched him, it looked like he had the confidence of a guy like Joe Burrow out there, and he showed that he's a more than capable athlete for the position. He's got that quick release that I'm looking for, and he's got really nice touch to the ball when he's throwing to the back of the end zone, and a poise that didn't falter when he was under duress. I did not watch this guy a lot during the regular season. Like I said, I'm an ACC guy, East Coast bias, whoop whoop, but I heard a lot about him heading into the draft season. He's got such a great first name that I figured I'd check him out, and I was really impressed. He moves well in the pocket, he can throw the ball from different angles, and I know that people are saying that he might be a product of the system, and I always love the counter that every quarterback is a system quarterback, because it's true. And sure, he's one of the guys that does throw the ball underneath quite a bit, but he knows when to take chances down the field. And if your offensive coordinator or play caller is not putting you in position with a lot of safe throws in this day and age of football, then they're just doing their quarterback a disservice. Now, I don't think that Anthony Gordon comes in and wins a starting job in his first season or two, and he might actually end up just being a career backup, because the guy's barely 200 pounds and he looks it on the field. He looks tiny. He looks like a slot wide receiver playing quarterback. But just like I said with Burrow, there's something about guys, when you see it, you know it. There's no one trait in particular that I can pinpoint and say this is why he has a chance for success or not. It's just a whole package thing with Anthony Gordon. But who knows, maybe he could come in and have a similar Gardner Minshew type of impact if he finds himself starting for a team in his rookie season. Now, this is where the comment section is going to get toxic. I swear I've always liked the Georgia program, got nothing against them, but I'm just not drinking the Jake Fromm Kool-Aid anymore, and that's why he's so low on this list. Yes, my draft projection for him is higher than Anthony Gordon's, but that's because I do believe that one of these NFL GMs will still be drinking the Kool-Aid. And it's actually kind of ironic that Jake Fromm beat out Jacob Eason and Justin Fields at Georgia, and yet I think that both of those guys have a higher potential in the NFL at quarterback than Jake Fromm does. I fell in love with him after his freshman performances and kept expecting him to come out and improve on that, but he never really did. I'm afraid that I just don't see any kind of improvement. I don't see the arm strength or the arm talent necessary to win in the NFL, and the small hands thing at quarterback is a thing. I know some people try and say that it's not, and there are definitely quarterbacks with small hands that have been successful in the NFL, but when it comes to playing in cold weather in the playoffs or December, and you can test this for yourself this fall and winter, if you don't have a 10-inch hand, it is way harder to hold onto a football when it is cold and wet, when you've got these tiny normal sized human hands and not these massive mitts that these NFL quarterbacks have. My comparison for Jake Fromm is Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton was a great second round pick. Jake Fromm could potentially be a great second or third round pick, but he will still always be the kind of quarterback that fans will want to find an upgrade for, much like Alex Smith, who saw himself get replaced by guys like Colin Kaepernick and then Patrick Mahomes, because teams are looking for something a little bit more dynamic, a guy that's going to attack downfield. The bus driver quarterback was so 1990s and early 2000s, but teams are looking for a mobile, strong-armed quarterback now, and those just aren't any of Jake Fromm's real strengths. Now, where I see Jake Fromm being a great asset to a team is as a career backup quarterback. If for some reason he lasts until the 4th or 5th round, I would take him like the Redskins took RG3 and Kirk Cousins one year. I would take 2 quarterbacks and I would make Jake Fromm come to training camp as the backup quarterback, knowing that he was not drafted to be a starter, so just learn the offense and help the starter out as best you can. I think that Jake Fromm would probably thrive in a role like that at the NFL level. But if you ask this guy to come in and be a starting quarterback for you in the next 2 years, you're going to be severely disappointed. Alright, and these last 2 picks are guys that I had to kind of dig through and find the guys that I liked myself personally. And at number 9, I'm going to go with Florida International quarterback James Morgan. In his junior year, James Morgan led FIU to a 9-win season, most in program history. He grew up in Wisconsin. He's a huge Packers fan, emulates Brett Favre with his play style. From what I saw from him, he's got functional athleticism and navigates the pocket really well, which allows for a lot of the deep shots to open up. And like I said, he grew up a Packers fan and wants to be Brett Favre. He does love to take some deep shots. He seemed really good off the blitz. The ball comes out of his hand nice and quickly, and he can throw from kind of any angle and off balance. But he does have this Uncle Rico throwing motion that, man, I hate when coaches try to change that stuff. Just let the man throw the way that he throws, so that he's not thinking about that, and he's thinking about just placing the ball where he knows how to put it. The way that he throws the ball now, he's got a pretty strong arm. My NFL comp for him is Jay Cutler. It might not be Jay Cutler strong, but the size and the athleticism and the movement in the pocket kind of reminded me of Cutler. I actually think that he'd be a great fit with the Packers, even though I'm sure that Aaron Rodgers would treat a rookie quarterback the same way that Brett Favre treated Aaron Rodgers, so he might not be the best mentor for him, but it'd be a great place for him to go and potentially develop and maybe get his chance down the road. And now for some honorable mentions before we get to number 10. And these are some guys that are from maybe some of the bigger programs that have draft eligible quarterbacks that I just didn't see as worthy of a pick higher than a 6th or 7th, if I'd even draft them at all. Now, if I was an NFL GM, I'd always find a way to trade down from a pick at some point, even if it's only a few spots, just so that I can accumulate an extra 6th or 7th round pick and take a flyer on a quarterback every single season. And I would do that as early as the 4th round, and then I'd use that extra pick to address the need that I could have been filling with the pick that I used on a project quarterback. The Packers used to do this all the time, and I guess the Patriots did it too in some capacity, but the trick is getting those guys in a position to succeed in preseason and garbage time, and then build them up in the eyes of other NFL GMs to then move for future assets. Or if you find a guy that just seems like a baller, you keep him, groom him for your future starter, and go from there. But as for my honorable mentions, I've got kind of a long list here. I'm just going to run through them because I didn't mention as many people in my honorable mentions or why I wasn't selecting them for my wide receivers video, and there were so many people that felt like I was disrespecting a guy that they thought was worthy of being a top 10 wide receiver in this draft class. The quarterbacks, it's a lot easier to know that these guys are not really in the top 5 or 6 range, but I agree, you could make an argument for any of them to be in the 7 to 10 range. And first up is Khalil Tate from Arizona. This guy's got all the athleticism you could ask for, and honestly, I don't know why he didn't have more success at Arizona. I kept on waiting for him to take that next step, but he never really did. He's got a nice thick thick build for a quarterback, and I'd love to bring him in as a camp body potentially, but I do think that Khalil Tate will end up not being drafted, and it's more likely to see him in the XFL starting next year and probably thriving in a place like that. Next up, I've got Nate Stanley out of Iowa. Iowa quarterbacks always seem to be really solid backup NFL quarterbacks. This dude is pretty big and solid. He played in a pro style offense, and I think that's why these guys always translate well as backup quarterbacks in the big leagues, because they've played in a pro style offense. They know how the protections work, but I just don't think that Nate Stanley is really that great. There's nothing that he really brings to the table that excites me. He doesn't have that individual trait like I've been referring to, but when you watch him, you also see that he's just not really that good. He'll probably get drafted because there are still some of these boomers running NFL teams that can't let go of that traditional quarterback prototype, and they think that they'll see something in Nate Stanley. Like I mentioned, that he's a big guy playing in a pro system, but we're quickly learning that that's not as important because you can always develop those skills later on. But Nate Stanley can't all of a sudden become a mobile passer. Speaking of mobile passers, I've got Steven Montez from Colorado and Tyler Huntley out of Utah. These guys are both mobile quarterbacks, but very different mobile quarterbacks. Montez is a big, thick guy at 6'4", 240 that can move around really well for a guy that size, but I don't know. He's just kind of all over the place for me. I think that he really got carried by the wide receiver there, Laviska Shenault, and he's a really likable guy. Teammates loved him. He was a captain, but he just doesn't have it as a true passer. Tyler Huntley, however, is a tiny little guy, 6'1", 200, but I just don't know if he's a good enough passer. I'm surprised that teams have not asked him to move to wide receiver, but somebody will probably take either a 7th round flyer on this guy just because he's either a great developmental option or he'd be a really good practice squad quarterback to try and emulate some of these other mobile quarterbacks around the league. And then we've got Cole McDonald from Hawaii, another prototypical size and arm strength, 6'4", 220, but this guy's got a terrible release, big long wind up, and just doesn't really seem like he's got it. Kind of crumbles under pressure. Same with Michigan State's Brian Lewerke. Seems like these guys after Kirk Cousins, they're all the same, but they just continue to get a little bit worse each time. If you didn't like Connor Cook, probably not going to like Brian Lewerke, except at least Brian Lewerke can move around a little bit, which is a shame because it did seem like he was going to continue to improve earlier on in his career. Never really did. And then finally, I got to mention this guy, another guy that I thought would become a lot better than he truly did. That's Michigan's Shea Patterson. This dude is terrible, should not get drafted. I think the reason that I thought that I would see something in him that never really fabricated was that I had Johnny Manziel syndrome. I was looking for the next version of him. Shea Patterson came out, similar skill set, same number, but man, he held that Michigan offense back, and much like Trace McSorley last year, this is not an NFL quarterback. Have fun playing in the XFL, but I just don't see it with Shea Patterson. So who does that leave at number 10? Well, I always seem to mention this way too much during draft season, but I am a Charlottesville-based guy. I go to UVA football games a few times a year. The in-laws have season tickets, and man, it has been a long time since I've seen a guy like this at quarterback for the Virginia Cavaliers, and that's Bryce Perkins. This guy is such a dynamic athlete, and it's wild because you don't think that he's moving as fast as he is while you're watching the play, but then the play's over and you're like, how did he just run past all of these guys? I don't know if it's the dreads making him look like he's moving in slow motion or what, but he's just a silky smooth athlete with super underrated speed. I really can't believe that the NFL Combine Selection Committee or whoever is responsible for inviting players to the NFL Combine, I cannot believe that they did not offer him an invite to this, because I needed to see what he ran in the 40. I needed to see it because I tell my father-in-law all the time, and I'd bounce back and forth whether or not I thought this guy had a chance in the NFL. But to be honest, it's that speed that matters the most to me with him, because I'm still not sure if he is as fast as I think he is, or if he was just really efficient with his movement. He's going to be a guy in Madden next year that you can probably pick up off the street, and he'll have like, I don't know, 35 awareness and terrible accuracy, but the throw power and stuff will all be there, and the speed will be really fun to play with. But when you think of a rhythm passer, like a guy that is shooting three-pointers in the NBA, when they get hot, when they get in that rhythm, they can't miss, they can't screw things up. But every once in a while you get that heat check, and it takes a little bit of time to get back into that groove, and that's kind of what Bryce Perkins suffers from. I don't know if he is capable of reading an NFL defense on a regular basis. He's more of a one read and bail kind of quarterback, and sometimes he really would just lock on to that first read and wait and wait and wait and either take a terrible sack, potentially fumble, or he would force it at the last second and throw an interception. But if there's a guy that's kind of under the radar that has that Taysom Hill skill set that a team could use in that role, man, it is Bryce Perkins. And not only was he one of the most dynamic players that I've ever seen live, especially playing at the quarterback position, off the field, this dude was one of the best leaders that this team has had. And this is a school that will dismiss guys for the slightest little thing. They pride themselves on having good character dudes, and he was one of the best of them all. I probably was just gushing about him way too much here, but I think the city of Charlottesville and myself, we're just all so impressed and so proud with the way that he carried himself and being able to lead this team that has been an annual underachieving squad because of the quarterback. He came in and completely changed the culture for the Virginia Cavaliers. In the 2 years that he played for the Cavaliers, he had two different wide receivers that were his go-to target. One of them actually plays for the Falcons, and he went undrafted last year in Olamide Zaccheaus, and the other one was Joe Reed. Joe Reed is getting drafted this year because he is a dynamic returner, built like a running back, great speed, but all of a sudden this year it wasn't just one wide receiver that was pretty good by the end of the year. It seemed like UVA had 3 or 4 wide receivers that could play, and I always credit that to good quarterback play because it's really hard to get a whole group of wide receivers to play effectively and at a high level. So when you see wide receivers that were originally underachieving all of a sudden start to step up and play well when they have a new quarterback, it's usually because the quarterback's putting the ball in a position where the wide receiver can make a play based on that wide receiver skill set. And Bryce Perkins just seemed to do that, man. And I'm trying to be impartial here, but remember what I said, I frequently would look at my father-in-law and tell him that I just didn't see Bryce Perkins making it in the NFL as a quarterback. But that was usually an emotional response to one of the bad plays that he would make. And while he makes all of these crazy impressive plays that you don't see coming, he is definitely capable of throwing out some really poor ones at the same time. I'm going to be really interested to see if he sticks on an NFL roster as a quarterback, but I'm telling you that he is a great guy to root for because he's just a good dude overall. That's going to do it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing. I know that this video is not as good as the wide receivers one because honestly, this group of quarterbacks is not that great, but hopefully you still enjoyed it. Tried to make it entertaining as I could. I'm going to try and pump out 2 more mock drafts before the NFL draft gets here. It sounds like they're not going to be pushing this thing back for these poor NFL GMs. They can't even have their scouts go to NFL Pro Days, and the GMs can't even give their free agents physicals. So this is going to be a really interesting draft season where I think that it's going to rely on a lot of people trusting the tape and going based off of what happened from September to January rather than overanalyzing these guys while they're working out on the sidelines and stuff like that. So it will be interesting to see it once the football season finally gets here, whenever that happens. It will be here though, whether or not they have to push it back or not. But it will be interesting to see how these guys will translate this draft season with the limited exposure to the players in the off season compared to previous draft classes. I think there's an opportunity here for front offices that don't typically draft well to get a leg up on other front offices that are usually really thorough during this season. So yeah, that's going to do it for me. Stay tuned for my next mock draft, and I will see you all in the next video.